My father was quite resourceful, and when he set his mind to something, could be quite determined as well. This led to some interesting moments. One fond example of his resourcefulness was when I was in elementary school. I developed an interest in secret passageways and hidden doorways and such. And he constructed one for me between the closet in my bedroom and the front hall closet. He cut an opening large enough, at least for me to get through, and put in a hinged door with foam insulation so that I could be in my room and then suddenly appear out by the front door or vice versa. I, needless to say, was very impressed and enjoyed this, and I gather that the subsequent owners of the house, their children, have continued to enjoy this capability up to the present time. One example that comes to mind was when our family was traveling in our old Greenbrier van. All of a sudden, the accelerator stopped working. And Dad was handy, so he opened up the engine compartment. The engine was in the back of this vehicle, and discovered that the accelerator cable had snapped. Now, you or I in this situation might just call AAA, but not my dad. He rigged up a string from the cam in the engine, which controls the speed. He ran that string out of the engine compartment and then up through the open space in the cabin, and then attached it around his shoulder. So then, if he leaned his shoulder forward, the engine would go faster. And if he leaned back, it would go slower. He got the car restarted and drove us all the way home with this technique on the accelerator. Not something I recommend you try at home, but it was quite impressive to us. One of Dad's long-time struggles was with various animals. And in these cases, his ingenuity was very much in evidence, but his success was somewhat less dramatic. One example that was very impressive to us was that we had some land up in New Hampshire that we'd acquired very, very cheaply after it had been lumbered for camping purposes. And we went up on several occasions and had wonderful camping trips. One I remember fondly with my aunt and uncle and my cousins from the Lexington Macks. But Dad, we had a big, heavy tent that we took up that was very difficult to sort of set up and take down. It was the old canvas style, a military surplus or surplus tent. And Dad wanted something more efficient and reliable. So he constructed this amazing sleeping little house, actually, made out of 2x4s with hinges, so that it could lie flat in the bed of our Greenbrier to be taken up there, and then would open out into this great sort of not great. It was not huge, but it had sort of an A-frame effect where there were 4 bunk beds, Mom and Dad and Steve and me. It was a beautiful piece of design and construction. We went up one weekend to set it up in New Hampshire, and it was beautiful. It looked perfectly stable, and it was large enough to sleep. No, you wouldn't live it. There was no living space. And then we planned to come up I believe it was the following weekend to spend the weekend camping there and living in this lovely place. It had some sort of cover over it. I forget what the cover was. So the following weekend, we went up again with all the food and everything we needed for a weekend of camping. And the lovely 2x4 structure that we had left there had been eaten. Not all of it, mind you. But wherever we had touched the structure with our hands, with the sweat and the salt on our hands, porcupines had chewed right through the 2x4s, and it was lying in wreckage on the ground. We turned around and went home again, and to my recollection, that's the last time we as a family ever went camping up there. Sad, but dramatic. There was one other encounter with the animals that went on for decades that nearly killed him. And this was his long-running battle in Concord and again in Pennsylvania, where my parents lived for the last 35 years, with squirrels. The problem was that my mother liked to feed the birds, and the squirrels loved the bird feed. So the trick was to try to get the bird feed to the birds before the squirrels had a chance to eat it. Now, commercial bird feeders often come with some sort of attachment to the house or to a tree, and those were non-starters because the squirrels were very adept climbers. So Dad ended up focusing on the type that is on a freestanding pole. And his first approach was to add a cone of aluminum beneath the bird feeder on the pole, so that when the squirrels climbed up the pole, they would be caught underneath this cone of aluminum, and they couldn't get around it in order to get onto the bird feeder itself. Well, that worked for about a week, and then the squirrels discovered that they could leap from a nearby tree and land on top of the bird feeder, and then it was all over. So my dad moved on to Mark II of the bird feeder, which had a cone both underneath the feeder itself and on top of the feeder, so that when the squirrels jumped on, they would hopefully slide off that top cone and not be able to get at the bird feed. But the birds, of course, could still get there. And that worked for a little while, too, until the squirrels developed the technique of extending both forelegs and rear legs, landing right on the top of the cone and gripping on, and then somehow letting themselves down. I don't remember how this actually worked. Letting themselves down across the lip of the cone and grabbing onto the bird feeder and into the food they were again. So none of the designs really was ever completely successful, but occasionally Dad would go out and chase them away, and the battle raged on decade after decade. The most dramatic moment occurred in my the house that my great-grandfather had built up in the hills, a place called Blue Ridge Summit, which was a summer house when the family lived in Baltimore. There's a train line that ran right up directly beneath our property. Like the house in Concord, the house in Blue Ridge Summit was on a very steep hill, and there was one model of or other of Dad's bird feeder designs out in the lawn, and the squirrels had gotten into the bird feeder. Now at this point, Dad was pushing 80, but was not ready to give up the fight. And when he saw the squirrels out there, he took a run at them. What he hadn't exactly figured on in this case was the steepness of that lawn, and he scared the squirrels away for the moment. But he got running down that slope, and he was going faster and faster, and couldn't really stop himself. So rather than just keep on running or rolling or whatever right down to the onto the railroad tracks, he intentionally ran himself into one of the stone piers holding up the porch. And that worked to stop him, but he broke his hip. Fortunately, he was still at 80, quite a vigorous man, and he was able to do his rehab, and he was really back to 100% within a few months. But after that time, we really didn't hear much more about the battle with the squirrels.